At the time of recording this, Sidney Poitier, one of the actors that plays in this movie, was alive. He sadly passed away January 6th, 2022. Therefore, please excuse us for using the present tense at some point when referring to him in this movie. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of the podcast where we discuss activism in film. We're your hosts, Connie
and Nikki.
In today's episode, we will be going over the 1967 American film Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, starring Sidney Poitier, Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, and Katherine Houghton.
If you guys haven't seen this movie yet, just to let you know, we really recommend you watch it. Otherwise, that's okay. We're giving you context, although we are warning you there are many spoilers throughout this analysis. Firstly, this movie is directed by Stanley Kramer, and it displays racial conflicts as well as intergenerational conflicts. The main characters of the movie are Joey Drayton, played by Katherine Houghton, and John Prentice, played by Sidney Poitier. Joey's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Drayton, are played by Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn. John Prentice's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Prentice, are played by Roy Glenn and Bea Richards. There's also a significant role, Tilly, the housekeeper, played by Isabel Stanford, as well as Monsignor Ryan, played by Cecil Calloway.
The movie is about Joanna, or commonly referred to as Joey, and her new fiancé, Dr. John Prentice, coming back to San Francisco from their trip to Hawaii, about to tell their parents about their engagement. This is before Dr. Prentice has to leave for Geneva that evening to work with the World Health Organization.
The movie was made in 1967. This was obviously a transitional period in America due to protests organized by activists like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which led to the Civil Rights Bill passed in 1964, officially outlawing segregation. But this was not a seamless transition. It was only in June of 1967 where all 50 states in the U.S. passed a bill to legalize interracial marriage. In December of 1967, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was released.
So the movie starts out at the airport. We see Joey and Dr. John Prentice. Let's just call him Dr. John, I think.
Or John.
Yeah. But it's good to mention doctor right now. For later. So we see them coming out of the airport.
Yeah.
And we don't really know that they're a couple until when he puts his hand around her.
Yeah, so far it's just the intro music and the credits are rolling and all we see is a white woman and a black man talking together, laughing. And we only assume they're a couple once John puts his arm around Joey.
It's cool to think about, though, because at the time they probably thought, oh yeah, a black man and a white woman. But now we're just two people walking out of the airport.
Yeah, no, that's great. And the scene ends with them walking to a cab together.
So we find out that they're actually taking the cab to go to the Draytons in order to have dinner. So that's why it's called Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. Because we find out that her parents never actually met the person she's engaged to.
I think what's also important to realize is they got engaged 10 days after meeting each other.
Yeah, and so so what happens is Joey goes to her house and she meets with her mom first, and she tells her mom about who she's engaged to, and
it's all happening really fast.
Yeah, and the mom is actually really happy with the description that Joey's giving. Joey never mentions race, though.
Yeah, she mentions he's a doctor, he's very successful, he's a nice man, nothing about his race.
Yeah, so when the doctor comes out of the mansion doors, because they're rich, you see Joey's mom's face, Miss Drayton's face, kind of shift. She was so happy, and then
just realizing that, this is an interracial engagement now.
And, I feel like she was trying to, be respectful, but, it was not working.
It's very confronting.
And it's weird because you see Joey being, very accepting of it, and then her parents not being accepting of it.
Yeah.
And her parents are supposed to be, these liberal-minded people in the movie.
At least that's what they describe them as.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, of course, the mom doesn't accept this.
Not just yet.
And then the dad is even worse. He's completely against it.
Yes, so after a certain period of time of getting to know John, they start seeing, the father starts coming to the scene and seeing that this engagement is interracial. He has a stronger reaction to the engagement, and even the mother tells him to, like, cool down, this is fine, we're gonna fix this, but he's, like, freaking out.
Yeah, so the dad is actually works for, I think it was The Guardian. He's
a journalist.
And they put in a lot of effort to find, like, he calls one of his coworkers and to look for,
a John Prentice.
Like Dr. John Prentice, and try to find dirt on this guy.
Yeah, anything on his record, any blemish at all. But he finds out that instead of a blemish, he's actually a widower. Both his child and his late wife died in a plane crash.
8 years ago.
Yeah.
But he also finds, like, a lot of great things that John has done.
Yeah.
Which means that any type of dirt that he would have wanted to find on John in order to go against this marriage is unsuccessful.
Yeah.
Which kind of lets you confront the fact that it's because of race.
Yeah,
no matter how much they try to not make it about race, they are not accepting of this marriage because of race.
Yeah.
They could say, oh, but it's dangerous, in the future, they might have a lot of problems. Yeah, that's race. That's an issue on race.
It boils down to that. I think it's also important to realize the kind of light they show John Prentice in. He's not like a run-of-the-mill type guy. He's like really, really, really successful. And I think they try to highlight that in the movie to, like you said, show that they're really putting in all this effort to cause problems just because of his racial status.
Yeah, it's almost like, because no one can be that perfect. Like, no one in the world is that, like, such a perfect, fiance. Like, everyone's parents want someone or their child to marry someone like as perfect as John Prentice.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they made him so perfect in the movie was to really highlight the fact that it wasn't any of his, like, if he had a blemish on his record, well, they would have probably taken that blemish and really, like, went hard at it because they wanted a reason to be not accepting of the marriage and it not being about race. But since there was no blemish, that's when they're also kind of confronted with the fact that it's race.
So far we see that Mr. Drayton is totally against this marriage. Mrs. Drayton is a little flexible on it, but still worried, which kind of resembles the same response by the Prentices.
Yeah. Actually, it's not that she's flexible, it's just that she seems like the most likely out of the two parents to end up being accepting of it.
Yeah.
Which she ends up being accepting of it. But let's focus on Dr. John Prentice's parents for a moment, because they are also not accepting of the marriage.
Yes, but the first impression is the same. He's on the phone, he describes this amazing girl that he met, how they're engaged, and it's the father on the other line saying, oh, that's amazing, very happy for you. And then Joey steps in and grabs the phone out of John's hand.
Invites them to dinner.
So we have another guess who's coming to dinner. I don't want to call it a problem, but it's definitely a gaslight. And it's also going to be...
It's definitely going to... I think she was trying to, like, make her parents really confront.
She's a gaslighter in this whole movie. But good for her.
I mean, like, listen, she's starting something, and that's good. It's something that she needs to start.
She's the bravest in this whole movie.
Because she loves him, and she'll do... And honestly, like, in the beginning of the movie, like, this dude seemed like a perfect gentleman, and he also seems like the perfect guy.
Yeah.
With all his accomplishments, so, like...
Why
obviously fight for him,
Yeah.
That's great. John seems a bit more, because he experienced racism first.
Yeah, he has reason to be worried.
So he's worried. He even told the dad, that if he didn't accept the marriage, that there was going to be no wedding in order to protect Joey. So let's go back to the Prentices.
Yeah, so Joey and John decide to pick up the Prentices from the airport, and that's when the Prentices realize that Joey is white. And they obviously respond negatively. Soon after, they arrive at the mansion and meet the Draytons.
Now that's when the conversation amongst the parents start. The moms are having conversation together, and the dads are having a separate conversation alone together. So the dads are both agreeing on the fact that this is not supposed to happen,
Yeah.
and that this shouldn't happen.
They're very against it.
So they are trying to find a way to stop it, while the moms are a little more open to it.
They seem more sympathetic on the side of Joey and John rather than the social aspect of interracial marriages.
Yeah, they're more focused on their children's happiness and their love for each other than race, and that's how they accept it.
Yeah.
The dads, on the other hand, are really
not having it. And I also want to add that the parents are fully aware of their children's intentions. They know that, the Draytons know that the Prentices are not bad people, and vice versa. So they know that this is not going to be a matter of, are they thinking logically? Are they responsible? This is more just, the fathers trying to look out for their kids. We actually noticed that in the private conversation between Dr. John Prentice and Mr. Drayton actually thinks John is a really nice person and a very successful person too, and they hit it off even though he doesn't accept the marriage.
So now I kind of want to get into the generational conflict that goes on in the movie. So after the parents have a conversation amongst themselves, Mr. Prentice pulls his son aside and talk to him about what him and Mr. Drayton discussed.
Yeah, and during this conversation, we're seeing that the father and son are not seeing eye to eye, eventually leading up to a full-on argument where Mr. Prentice is talking about what his son owes to his parents after so many years of raising him, putting him through school and everything.
Sacrifice, yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, Dr. Prentice does not agree to this.
Yeah.
He actually says that the older generations are so used to their ways, they are unable to accept the different, and in this case better, ways of the younger generation. Because, Joey and Dr. Prentice, they're the younger generation.
Yeah.
They are more accepting of this. It's the parents that are non-accepting of this, even though, like we said before, the Draytons are literally supposed to be liberal-minded. They're supposed to be more accepting of this.
Yeah, that's what they portrayed in the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, so in this movie, yes, it's an interracial conflict, but it's also this generational conflict as well, with the older views versus the younger views.
And I think even though the Draytons paint themselves as such liberal-minded, the parents, I mean, their view on liberal-minded is not necessarily Joey's and John's view on liberal-mindedness.
Yeah.
Anyway, towards the end of the discussion between father and son, Dr. John Prentice makes a really beautiful monologue. It's almost 3 minutes long, and he starts it by saying, "I don't owe you anything," which is really something that I think a lot of children can relate to. The fact that our parents think they did so much for us that the kids now owe them something. Even though, and like John said, that's their job. Their job was raising them and doing everything they could to assure a good future. And now that John has something amazing ahead of him, like this engagement, his parents are trying to stop him.
In another conversation, this time between Mr. and Mrs. Drayton, Miss Drayton makes the argument that they taught their daughter to be liberal-minded. To paraphrase, they taught their daughter to be kind to everyone no matter of their race. They did not, however, tell her she couldn't marry someone because they're a different race. Now, on the topic of generational conflict, let's talk about Monsignor Ryan. So he is an older gentleman as well, who is coming to dinner as well. He is actually pretty accepting of the marriage.
Yeah, and even I think, in spite of his status being a Catholic conservative white gentleman, he is still he's still able to see past the race and still look at the couple as just a nice loving relationship.
Yeah, so it kind of shows that despite there being a generational conflict, because these different points of views and these different ideas, there is a possibility of change and acceptance.
Yeah, acceptance, yeah.
And of open-mindedness. But there is also another character that we need to talk about, who is Tilly.
Tilly the housekeeper.
The housekeeper.
Yeah.
Who is actually not accepting of this marriage.
Yeah, and she's actually very much against it, and it was made obvious when she was speaking to John Prentice in private.
She was yelling at him.
Yeah, and she was trying to protect, Joey as best she could, because she was a housekeeper and she was there for Joey for her whole childhood. And, I mean, I think it's also important to mention she is a black character in the story, and she still has these prejudices against black people.
And this is due to, the effects of racism. It not only affects the mentality as well. And that's what it's showing. It's showing how, it's not only, like, white people who disagree on this, it's everyone. And that's because racism, especially at that time, was so deep into people's minds that people would, like, believe these prejudices and would be against things like this.
Yeah.
And so that kind of makes it even more difficult for people like Joey and John to get married and to just be in a loving relationship, because basically both sides are against each other.
And I think,
or against this.
I think even there is a difference between Tilly's reaction and the Drains reaction. The Drains are just there to protect their status and Joey's status. Tilly, however, really, really thinks that there is something wrong with John.
She doesn't trust him.
That John is somehow dangerous. The somehow is obviously
this is false, yes. And this is due to her growing up around people believing this and saying this to her. So, she can't really help it, because that's what she was used to. That's what she's used to.
But whether she likes it or not, she ends up having to make dinner for so many people, including the Prentices. So finally, I'd like to end this analysis by talking about Mr. Drayton's monologue, which is done by Spencer Tracy, who did such a good job on this. He basically talks about all the cons of the interracial aspect of the marriage, mentioning his concerns for the future and why they should be concerned, which is totally valid. However, he ends up saying that he's accepting of this marriage, which is a huge character development on his part.
Yeah, because he's taking consideration of the issues that will stem from this marriage, but he's also taking consideration of their love and how, like, they're going to be together, so they're going to support each other.
Which is definitely something that his wife mentioned to him, and something that Monsignor Ryan also mentioned. So at this point of the movie, pretty much everyone is for this marriage except for Mr. Prentice, which, I mean, at this point, that's not really important because they're going to get on with it. It's going to be like a happy ending.
And, like, listen, it's important that he accepts the marriage. You already have Mrs. Prentice that accepts it, so that's, like, something that's, like, an influence for him.
Yeah.
But also Mr. Drayton says that, like, while the two are away to Geneva, because the whole movie is basically in this one day where they're gonna leave that evening.
Yeah.
That while they're away, he's going to try to change the minds of Mr. Prentice.
Yeah. So he ends the speech by saying that, and the movie ends with them having dinner together. So, how is this movie activism?
Well, it was actually said by Sidney Poitier in a 2020 interview with the American Film Institute that this movie was not made for the awards or the entertainment aspect of it, but simply just to highlight that even though interracial marriage was legal, it is still highly stigmatized by those who still had those conservative views on race.
So back then, in 1967, it wasn't necessarily ahead of its time, but it was activism because it had to change the minds of those who were still stuck in the past.
Yeah, because it was legalized in June, it was June 12th, 1967, and then December 12th was when the film came out.
Yeah.
So it was supposed to initiate conversation and make people more open-minded.
So overall, what are your thoughts on the movie?
I actually really enjoyed it. I think Sidney Poitier always plays really powerful characters, and he played an amazing role in this movie.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't an exception. He played a really amazing character, a doctor, a gentleman, just everything. And I agree, I think this movie is really amazing. I still watch it. I still think it's enjoyable and a really good viewing.
And also, it's great to look at that time, like, their views and what they thought of something that for us now is normal. It's perfectly all right, but back then you kind of see that at the time it was not, even if it was legalized, it was not seen positively.
Yeah, this is definitely a historical classic for me.
For sure. So thank you guys for listening, and we really hope you tune in to the next episode.
And again, if you haven't seen Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, we highly recommend you go watch it.